They say you can never go home again, but nobody ever tells you what happens when home doesn't recognize you anymore. For Sarah Mitchell, 6 years of military service had changed her in ways that Pine Valley wasn't ready to understand, but they were about to learn. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet streets of Pine Valley, a small town nestled in the heart of Georgia. Sarah Mitchell adjusted the strap of her military pack, her footsteps echoing faintly against the worn asphalt as she made her way down Main Street. Her sharp green eyes scanned her surroundings, taking in the subtle changes since her last visit. The old brick bookstore she'd loved as a teenager was now a café with brightly painted shutters, and the hardware store she used to visit with her father had a shiny new sign, but the same rustic charm. Sarah had spent the last 6 years serving as a logistics specialist in the Army, a role that took her to conflict zones and remote outposts across the globe. The time away had shaped her both physically and emotionally. Her once soft features now bore the chiseling of discipline and hardship. A scar above her left eyebrow served as a silent testament to the dangers she'd faced. But today, as her boots carried her through her hometown, she felt both a longing for familiarity and an unsettling sense of detachment. Every step down Main Street stirred memories she'd kept carefully tucked away during her deployment. The courthouse steps where she'd graduated high school, the park bench where she'd shared her first kiss with Tommy Richardson, before he moved away to college and never came back. The old movie theater still advertised weekend matinees, though its marquee now displayed digital titles instead of the plastic letters she used to help Mr. Johnson arrange every Thursday evening. The scent of blooming jasmine mixed with the earthy aroma of a nearby barbecue stand wafted through the air. It brought back memories of simpler times, summers spent laughing with friends, helping her mother in the garden, and sneaking out with her older brother to watch fireworks from the hilltop. But those memories now felt like echoes, as distant as the places she'd left behind. A group of high school students passed by, their carefree laughter and animated chatter a stark contrast to the measured silence she'd grown accustomed to. One girl, probably no older than 16, caught Sarah's eye and quickly looked away, intimidated perhaps by the uniform or the way Sarah carried herself, straight-backed, alert, scanning her surroundings with the watchful gaze that had become second nature. Her stomach grumbled softly, pulling her from her thoughts. She scanned the street ahead and spotted Ruby's Diner, a modest cafe with a weathered wooden facade and a welcome home banner fluttering in the breeze above the entrance. Sarah smiled faintly at the irony. She wasn't sure if the sign was meant for someone else or if it was just a generic gesture, but it felt like a sign. The bell above the door chimed as she pushed it open, a sound that transported her instantly to Sunday mornings after church, when her father would treat the family to Ruby's famous chocolate chip pancakes. The familiar clink of utensils and low hum of conversation filled the air, along with the comforting smell of freshly brewed coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, she could almost pretend nothing had changed. Behind the counter, Ruby Walker looked up from the coffee pot she was refilling. The years had added a few more silver streaks to her dark hair, but her warm smile remained exactly as Sarah remembered it. Ruby had been more than just the diner's owner. She was a longtime friend of Sarah's parents, the kind of friend who showed up unannounced with casseroles when Sarah's mother was sick, who never missed a graduation or birthday celebration. "Well, if it isn't Sarah Mitchell," Ruby said warmly, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached. "Back home and looking as sharp as ever." She paused, studying Sarah's face with the keen eye of someone who had watched her grow up. "Though I see you've picked up a few new stories along the way." Sarah's hand instinctively went to the scar above her eyebrow. "Occupational hazard," she replied with a slight shrug. "Nothing serious." Ruby's expression softened with concern. "Your mama told me about that day, when they called to tell her you were injured." She shook her head slowly. "Nearly gave us all heart attacks, you know. But look at you now, strong as ever." Sarah felt a twinge of guilt. She'd never told her mother the full story of that day. The ambush, the firefight, the desperate scramble to save her wounded teammates while blood trickled into her eyes from her own injury. Some stories weren't meant for hometown diners and worried mothers. "Sit anywhere you like, honey," Ruby continued, gesturing to the red vinyl booths lining the walls. First meal's on the house, it's the least we can do for our hometown hero. I'm no hero, Ruby, Sarah said quietly, sliding into a corner booth where she could keep an eye on both the entrance and the window. Just did my job like everyone else over there. Ruby clicked her tongue disapprovingly. You always were too modest for your own good. Coffee? Sarah nodded gratefully, watching as Ruby filled a mug with the diner's signature dark roast. The ceramic was thick and sturdy, the same heavy-duty mugs the diner had used for as long as she could remember. She wrapped her hands around it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Menu's mostly the same, Ruby said, pulling a slightly worn laminated sheet from her apron pocket. Though we did add a few new items. Tom finally convinced me to try that avocado toast all the kids are crazy about these days. She rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Times change, I suppose. Sarah smiled, remembering Ruby's stubborn resistance to changing anything about her traditional menu. Some things shouldn't change too much, she said, scanning the familiar list of comfort foods. Her eyes lingered on the meatloaf special, her father's favorite. Your dad still comes in every Thursday for that, Ruby said softly, as if reading her thoughts. Says nobody makes it quite like we do. The mention of her father brought a fresh wave of emotion that Sarah quickly suppressed. Their last conversation before her deployment had been tense, filled with unspoken fears and things they both wished they could say, but couldn't find the words for. Now, 6 years later, she wasn't sure if those words would come any easier. I'll have the usual, Sarah said, handing the menu back. Ruby's eyebrows rose slightly. Chicken fried steak, extra gravy, mashed potatoes, and green beans, she recited from memory. After all this time? Sarah nodded, a genuine smile tugging at her lips. Some cravings you just can't satisfy with army food. Ruby laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to fill the entire diner. Coming right up, soldier. She turned toward the kitchen, then paused. It's good to have you home, Sarah. Real good. As Ruby walked away, Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee, letting her gaze drift around the diner. Most of the lunch crowd had cleared out, leaving only a few regulars she vaguely recognized. Mr. Peterson still occupied his usual stool at the counter, his newspaper spread out before him, and Mrs. Davis sat by the window, daintily cutting her pie into precise bites. The diner itself had barely changed. The same vintage Coca-Cola signs adorned the walls, the same wobble in the ceiling fan, even the same slight squeak in the swinging kitchen door. But Sarah had changed, and that made everything feel slightly off-kilter, like looking at a familiar photograph through a warped lens. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. Her bus wouldn't leave for another hour, plenty of time to eat and maybe catch up with Ruby a bit more. She hadn't planned on staying in Pine Valley long, just passing through on her way to her new posting in Fort Benning. But sitting here in Ruby's diner, surrounded by the ghosts of her past life, she wondered if maybe she should have planned for more time. The door chime rang again, and Sarah's military instincts automatically assessed the new arrivals. A group of teenagers, loud and boisterous, still wearing their varsity jackets despite the warm spring weather. They reminded her of herself and her friends at that age, before college choices and military commitments had scattered them across the country. Before she learned that some homecomings were harder than others. The group of teenagers made their way to a table near the center of the café, their laughter loud and sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of conversation. Sarah Mitchell barely glanced at them, focusing instead on the comfort of her steaming coffee. She'd encountered her fair share of rowdy crowds during her service and had long since learned to tune out unnecessary distractions. "Did you see her uniform?" one of the teens whispered, loud enough for the entire café to hear. Sarah's ears twitched at the comment, but she kept her gaze steady, watching the steam rise from her cup. "She's probably one of those jarheads who think they own the world," another teen said, a boy with a blue streak in his hair. Jason Reed, she guessed from the varsity jacket and the smug, overly confident expression he wore. The others in the group chuckled, emboldened by his remark. Sarah's grip on her coffee mug tightened slightly, but she took a calming breath. She wasn't here to cause trouble. Ruby Walker, noticing the group's increasing volume, approached their table with a cautious smile. You kids need anything? She asked, her voice friendly but firm. We're good, Jason replied, waving Ruby off dismissively. Then turning to Sarah, he added loudly, Hey, soldier. What are you doing here scaring all the decent folks? A hush fell over the cafe as heads turned toward their table. Sarah slowly set her coffee down and turned to face the group. Her expression was calm, almost disinterested, but her green eyes carried an unmistakable sharpness. Just grabbing a meal, same as anyone else, she said evenly, her voice carrying the kind of controlled authority that silenced rooms. But Jason wasn't deterred. Grabbing a meal? He sneered, leaning forward in his chair. Shouldn't you be off somewhere bombing villages or something? Ruby stepped forward quickly, her face flushed with frustration. That's enough, Jason, she said, her voice rising slightly. This is a respectable place. You'll keep it that way. Jason ignored her, his focus locked on Sarah. Bet you think you're some kind of hero, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Strutting around in that uniform, pretending like you're better than us. Sarah remained seated, her expression unreadable. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the cafe pressing down on her, waiting to see what she would do. Slowly, she stood to her full height, adding an air of quiet intimidation. I don't think I'm better than anyone, she said calmly, meeting Jason's defiant glare. I'm just trying to enjoy my meal in peace. You should try it sometime. The group chuckled nervously, but Jason wasn't done. With a sudden, deliberate motion, he reached out and grabbed Sarah's water glass from the table, smashing it onto the floor. The sound of shattering glass filled the cafe, followed by a stunned silence. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she remained composed. You shouldn't have done that, she said softly. Jason smirked, but his confidence faltered as Sarah stepped closer, her movements deliberate and controlled. The air in the cafe was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the faint clinking of glass shards being swept aside by Ruby Walker. Sarah Mitchell stood calm and steady, her sharp green eyes locked on Jason Reed. His smirk had faded slightly, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. You're going to clean that up, Sarah said, her voice low and measured, gesturing toward the shattered glass. Jason scoffed, masking his unease with bravado. Or what? You gonna make me? He shot back, stepping closer. The group of teens behind him shifted uncomfortably, a few muttering under their breath. Ruby opened her mouth to intervene, but Sarah raised a hand, signaling her to stay back. I don't want trouble, Sarah said evenly, but you need to back off. Jason let out a short, mocking laugh. Back off? You don't scare me, soldier girl. You think that uniform makes you untouchable? Without warning, he lunged forward, his arm swinging in a clumsy attempt to shove her. But Sarah had faced far worse than an angry teenager. Years of training and muscle memory kicked in as she sidestepped smoothly, grabbing his wrist mid-swing and twisting it into a simple but effective joint lock. Jason let out a sharp yelp of pain as Sarah applied just enough pressure to immobilize him without causing serious harm. What the? Let go! He shouted, struggling against her grip. Calm down, Sarah said firmly, her voice steady and controlled. You're embarrassing yourself. The cafe patrons gasped, and the group of teens froze, their faces pale with shock. Jason squirmed, but Sarah held him securely, her movements precise and deliberate. This is how it ends when you don't think before you act, she added, her tone laced with just enough authority to remind everyone she was in control. One of the teens, a boy named Mike, stepped forward hesitantly. Let him go, he pleaded, his voice shaky. Sarah glanced at him, then back at Jason, whose bravado had crumbled entirely. Are you done? She asked. Jason, releasing his arm and stepping back, stumbled away from her, rubbing his wrist and glaring daggers. His face flushed with humiliation as he muttered, You'll regret that. Maybe, Sarah said simply, turning back toward her table. The group huddled together briefly, their defiance replaced with nervous murmurs. Jason, still clutching his wrist, barked a quick, Let's get out of here, and stormed toward the door. The others followed him without looking back, their pride as shattered as the glass on the floor. As the door swung shut behind them, the cafe seemed to exhale collectively. Ruby approached Sarah cautiously, her expression a mixture of concern and admiration. "You all right?" she asked. "Fine," Sarah replied, her calm demeanor intact. She bent down to pick up a stray shard of glass. Just another day. The sun hung low in the sky as Sarah Mitchell stepped out of Ruby's diner, her military pack slung over one shoulder. The faint scent of rain lingered in the air, and a cool breeze brushed past her face, a small reprieve from the earlier tension inside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah adjusted her pack and glanced down the road. The bus station was only a few blocks away. "Just get to the station," she murmured to herself, shaking off the confrontation. She had no regrets about how she'd handled Jason Reed and his friends, but she knew well enough that people like them rarely let things go easily. As Sarah walked, Jason and his group lingered in a dark alley near the diner. The boy's face was flushed with humiliation, his hand still rubbing the wrist Sarah had twisted. "She thinks she's so tough," he muttered bitterly, kicking a trash can. Mike, one of his friends, shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe we should just drop it, Jason. She's military. What did you expect?" "I'm not letting her get away with this," Jason snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. "Nobody makes a fool out of me." Tommy, another teen in the group, raised an eyebrow. "What are you going to do? She could probably take all of us down again." Jason's lips curled into a sly grin as he pulled his phone from his pocket. "I know someone who can handle her," he said, scrolling through his contacts until he landed on the name he wanted. Marcus Graves, his older brother and the leader of a local biker gang. The others exchanged nervous glances as Jason pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before Marcus's gruff voice answered. "What do you want?" Jason hesitated for a moment before launching into his complaint. "There's this military chick in town," he began, his voice rising with indignation. "She embarrassed me and my friends, twisted my arm in front of everyone at Ruby's." Marcus let out a low chuckle. "You're calling me because you got roughed up by a soldier? Thought you could handle yourself, little brother." "It's not like that," Jason protested. "She's dangerous, man. You should have seen her. She barely even flinched, made me look like a fool." Marcus's tone turned serious. "Where is she now?" Jason glanced down the street and spotted Sarah turning the corner toward the bus station. "She's heading to the station," he said quickly. "I want her to pay for what she did." There was a long pause before Marcus responded. "Fine, I'll bring the boys. You stay put." Jason grinned triumphantly as the call ended. "You'll see," he said, turning to his friends. "She's going to regret messing with me." Meanwhile, Sarah reached the bus station and sat down on one of the weathered benches, her back straight and her pack resting beside her. The station was quiet, with only a few other people waiting for their rides. A young mother rocking her baby, an older man reading a newspaper, and a teenager listening to music through oversized headphones. Sarah's eyes scanned the area instinctively, cataloging exits, potential hazards, and the demeanor of those around her. Years of military training made it second nature. She didn't notice the faint rumble of motorcycle engines in the distance. At least, not yet. Ruby Walker watched through the diner window as 3 more motorcycles roared past, their riders clad in leather and wearing expressions that meant trouble. She knew Marcus Graves and his crew. They'd been causing problems in Pine Valley for years. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and dialed the police, but she knew they probably wouldn't arrive in time. "Lord," she whispered, watching the bikers disappear around the corner toward the bus station. "Watch over that girl." But Sarah Mitchell didn't need watching over. As the rumble of engines grew louder, she remained seated, her posture relaxed but alert. She'd faced worse odds in worse places. If Marcus Graves and his gang wanted trouble, they'd find that this soldier was more than ready to give them exactly what they were looking for. The distant thunder of motorcycles grew closer, and Sarah's fingers drummed a steady rhythm on her knee. 6 years in the military had taught her many things, but perhaps the most important lesson was this. Sometimes the best defense was letting your opponent make the first move. So she waited, her green eyes sharp and calculating, as the sound of approaching trouble grew louder with each passing second. The young mother at the station clutched her baby closer, her eyes wide with fear. The older man lowered his newspaper, and the teenager pulled out one earphone, all of them sensing the impending confrontation. Sarah remained still, her expression neutral but her mind already mapping out scenarios, tactics, and potential outcomes. The first motorcycle rounded the corner, its chrome gleaming in the late afternoon sun, followed by 5 more. Sarah didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give any indication that she was concerned about the approaching threat. She simply waited, her military training having taught her that patience was often the deadliest weapon of all. The low growl of motorcycle engines echoed through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Sarah Mitchell, seated on the worn bench at the bus station, looked up from her thoughts. Her sharp green eyes narrowed slightly as she scanned the horizon, spotting a group of motorcycles turning onto the main road. The other people at the station began to notice too. The young mother instinctively held her baby closer, her gaze darting nervously toward the approaching bikers. The older man folded his newspaper, muttering something under his breath, while the teenager pulled out one of his earbuds, his expression turning uneasy. Sarah shifted her weight slightly, resting her elbows on her knees as the motorcycles pulled into the station's parking lot. One by one, the riders parked their bikes in a semicircle, effectively cutting off the station from the main road. The engines sputtered to a stop, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. At the center of the group was Marcus Graves, a burly man with a shaved head and a leather vest emblazoned with the name Iron Wolves across the back. His piercing blue eyes locked onto Sarah as he dismounted his bike with deliberate slowness. Behind him, 5 other bikers followed suit, each one clad in heavy leather and steel-toed boots, their intimidating presence casting long shadows over the small bus station. Marcus removed his sunglasses, revealing a scar running diagonally across his left cheek, and smirked. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice rough like gravel. "You must be the soldier who gave my little brother a lesson in manners." Sarah leaned back slightly, her expression calm, but her posture alert. "Your brother needs more than a lesson in manners," she replied evenly, her voice steady and unwavering. The other bikers chuckled darkly, their laughter filled with menace. Marcus's smirk widened, though his eyes glinted with cold fury. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, taking another step closer. "But you see, around here we don't let people humiliate family without consequences." Sarah remained silent, her gaze sweeping over the bikers. She noted their positions, their weapons. A chain wrapped around one man's shoulder, a tire iron clutched by another, a long hunting knife strapped to Marcus's belt. Years of training allowed her to assess the situation in seconds, mapping out her next moves. The tension thickened as Marcus took another step closer, towering over her. "You're going to apologize to Jason," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "And then maybe, just maybe, we'll let you leave in one piece." Sarah rose slowly from the bench, her height not matching Marcus's but her presence unmistakable. She adjusted the strap of her military pack and locked eyes with him. "I don't apologize for doing the right thing," she said firmly. Marcus's smirk faded, replaced by a snarl. The other bikers closed ranks, their body language shifting from intimidation to aggression. "Wrong answer," Marcus growled. "Boys, teach her what happens when you cross the Iron Wolves." The bikers began to move in, the faint metallic clink of chains and the scrape of boots against concrete signaling the impending fight. Sarah's muscles tensed, her mind already calculating her first move as she prepared to show these men exactly why challenging a trained soldier had been their biggest mistake. The young mother gasped, clutching her baby tighter as she backed away from the scene. The older man with the newspaper stood frozen, his knuckles white as he gripped the paper. The teenager with the headphones fumbled for his phone, likely trying to call for help. But Sarah knew that whatever was about to happen would be over long before any assistance could arrive. "Last chance," Sarah said calmly, her voice carrying across the station. "Walk away now, and we can all pretend this never happened." Marcus's response was a bitter laugh that echoed off the station walls. "You military types," he sneered, "always thinking you're above everyone else. Time to learn some respect for the local way of doing things." Sarah's lips curved into a slight, knowing smile. She'd given them their chance to leave peacefully. What happened next would be entirely their responsibility. As the first biker moved toward her, chain swinging, Sarah Mitchell prepared to show Pine Valley exactly what 6 years of military training could do. Their mistake hadn't been in choosing to fight. Their mistake had been in choosing her as their target. The first biker lunged toward Sarah, chain wishing through the air in a wide arc. Sarah stepped to the side with precision, her movements fluid and controlled, the chain missing her by inches. With a quick twist of her arm, she grabbed the chain as it swung back, yanking it sharply and throwing the man off balance. Before he could recover, she delivered a swift kick to his midsection, sending him sprawling onto the concrete. Another biker charged in with a tire iron raised high. Sarah ducked low, her instincts kicking in like clockwork. As the tire iron came down, she stepped inside his swing, using her shoulder to slam into his chest. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and he stumbled backward, dropping the weapon. Sarah followed up with a quick jab to his jaw, leaving him dazed as he collapsed to the ground. The crowd at the bus station gasped, their shock audible as the fight unfolded. Sarah caught sight of the young mother clutching her baby tighter, her eyes wide with fear. Sarah made a mental note to minimize collateral damage, keeping the fight contained to protect the innocent bystanders. Marcus Graves growled in frustration, signaling to the others. "What are you waiting for? Take her down." 2 bikers advanced simultaneously. One wielded a length of metal pipe, the other bare-fisted but built like a truck. Sarah assessed them in a split second, her military training sharpening her focus. She moved first, sidestepping the one with the pipe and delivering a well-timed elbow strike to his ribs. The man let out a grunt of pain but managed to swing the pipe wildly. Sarah ducked again, grabbing the pipe this time and using it to block a punch from the larger man. The larger biker tried to grab her, but Sarah was faster. She spun around him, twisting his arm behind his back in a controlled joint lock. With a precise motion, she used his weight against him, forcing him to the ground. His roar of pain echoed through the station as she released him and turned her attention back to the man with the pipe. He hesitated now, the confidence in his eyes replaced with uncertainty. Sarah didn't wait for him to recover. She stepped forward and delivered a sharp kick to his knee, forcing him down. A follow-up strike to his shoulder disarmed him completely, and the pipe clattered to the ground. Marcus stood back, watching as his men fell one by one. His expression darkened, and his hand went to the hunting knife on his belt. "You think you're tough, soldier?" He snarled, stepping forward. "Let's see how you handle this." Sarah faced him squarely, her breathing steady despite the physical exertion. "Last chance," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Walk away." Marcus's response was a feral growl as he lunged, the blade flashing in the dim light. Sarah moved with practiced ease, sidestepping his attack and twisting his wrist with precision. The knife clattered to the ground, and in the same motion, Sarah swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing onto his back. Marcus Graves groaned as he lay on the concrete, the wind knocked out of him and his pride shattered. Sarah Mitchell stood above him, her breathing steady though adrenaline coursed through her veins. Around her, the other bikers writhed in pain or lay motionless, stunned by the efficiency of her takedown. The bus station was eerily quiet, save for the faint whimper of the young mother trying to comfort her crying baby. The teenager with headphones slowly lowered his music player, his mouth slightly open in awe. The older man with the newspaper stood, his hands trembling as he folded it neatly and set it aside, as if acknowledging that he had just witnessed something far beyond a typical altercation. Sarah looked around, scanning the crowd to ensure there were no further threats. Her military instincts kicked in once more as she assessed the area for any lingering danger. The bikers, including Marcus, were no longer a threat. Their weapons lay scattered across the ground, and their spirits seemed as broken as their bodies. She crouched briefly to pick up Marcus's hunting knife, flipping it in her hand before tossing it into a nearby trash can. The clatter of metal against the bin echoed through the station. "This is over," she said firmly, her voice low but carrying unmistakable authority. Marcus glared at her, his pride still refusing to yield. "You think this changes anything?" He spat, though his tone was weaker now. "We'll be back." Sarah leaned in closer, her green eyes locking onto his. "Not if you know what's good for you," she replied, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. "Take your men and leave." For a moment, Marcus hesitated, his bruised ego battling against the reality of their defeat. Then, with a defeated growl, he motioned to the others. "Get up," he barked heavily. "We're done here." The bikers, groaning and limping, began to drag themselves toward their motorcycles. One of them, a lanky man with a bloody nose, muttered something under his breath, but a sharp glare from Sarah silenced him. The engines roared to life one by one, and the group rode off into the distance, their once menacing presence reduced to a pathetic retreat. As the rumble of motorcycles faded, Sarah turned her attention back to the crowd at the station. She could feel their eyes on her, a mix of awe, fear, and gratitude. The young mother whispered softly to her baby, rocking him gently, while the older man cleared his throat nervously. It was the young teenager who broke the silence. "That was amazing," he said, his voice full of admiration. "Are you like a superhero or something?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "No, just someone who knows how to handle trouble," she said, her tone light but steady. Ruby Walker, who had rushed to the station after hearing about the bikers, stepped forward cautiously. "Sarah," she said, her voice heavy with concern. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Sarah replied, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Just another day." But as she looked around at the scattered weapons, the disturbed gravel, and the shocked faces of the onlookers, she knew this was more than just another day. This was a reminder of who she was now. Not just a soldier returning home, but someone who could stand up to bullies and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the bus station's weathered concrete. Sarah's bus would be arriving soon, but she had a feeling that Pine Valley wouldn't soon forget what had happened here today. Sometimes, she reflected, coming home meant more than just returning to familiar places. It meant showing people that you'd changed, and maybe helping them change too. Sarah Mitchell stood in the middle of the bus station, her shoulders still squared and her posture firm, but her piercing green eyes softened as they swept across the crowd. The adrenaline from the fight was beginning to fade, leaving behind a deep exhaustion. She adjusted the strap of her military pack, letting out a slow, steady breath. The young mother, still clutching her baby, gave Sarah a nervous smile. The older man with the newspaper nodded solemnly, his lined face carrying a newfound respect. The teenager, wide-eyed with admiration, stepped closer, waiting for Sarah to say something. "I'm not here to fight," Sarah began, her voice low but carrying enough weight to command attention. "That's not why I came back." She paused, letting her words settle in the silence. Her eyes flicked to the distance where the bikers had disappeared, then back to the faces of the people before her. "Why I signed up for the army," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "I thought I understood what sacrifice meant. I thought it was about giving time, effort, maybe even risking your life for something bigger than yourself. But the truth is, you can't ever fully understand it until you've lived it." She reached up to touch the faint scar above her eyebrow, her fingers brushing it absent-mindedly. "I've seen things no one should have to see. I've lost people I called family, brothers and sisters in arms who didn't make it home. And those of us who do make it back, we're not the same." Her voice faltered for a moment, but she steadied herself, meeting the gaze of the young teenager who had spoken earlier. "The hardest part isn't the danger, it's coming home. It's stepping back into a world that feels so different from the one you left, where people don't really understand what you've been through. Sometimes they don't even want to try." The teenager's expression turned somber, his earlier excitement replaced by quiet reflection. The older man nodded again, his lips pressing into a thin line as if he understood exactly what Sarah was saying. "But I came back because this is home," Sarah said, gesturing around her. "This is what we fight for. The people, the places, the chance to build something better. And we don't ask for much in return, just a little respect, a little understanding." The young mother wiped a tear from her cheek, her baby now quietly resting in her arms. "Thank you," she whispered. Sarah offered her a small, tired smile. "It's not about being a hero," she said softly. "It's about being human." Ruby Walker stepped forward, her eyes glistening. Sarah, honey, you've always been more than just a soldier to us. You're family. And what you did today, well, those boys needed that lesson. Maybe, Sarah replied, but violence isn't always the answer. Sometimes it's just the last resort when words aren't enough. A police siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sarah knew they'd want statements, explanations, paperwork. But for now, she remained still, letting the moment sink in. An elderly woman who had been watching from the station's doorway shuffled forward. "My Harold," she said, her voice quavering. "He served in Vietnam. Came home different, just like you said. Nobody understood him either." She reached out and patted Sarah's arm. "But he never stopped being a good man. Just like you're a good woman, standing up to those troublemakers." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you, ma'am," she managed. The bus station was beginning to fill with more people now, drawn by the commotion and staying for the aftermath. Some whispered among themselves, others just watched Sarah with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "You know," the teenager said, breaking another moment of silence, "my brother's thinking about joining the military. I used to worry about him, but seeing you today, maybe it's not so bad." Sarah turned to him, her expression serious. "It's not bad or good. It's just a choice, a hard one. Tell your brother to make sure he knows why he's choosing it. The uniform isn't what makes the soldier. It's the heart underneath." Ruby touched Sarah's shoulder gently. "Your father would be proud seeing you today." Sarah's breath caught slightly. "Would he? Sometimes I wonder if he even recognizes me anymore." "Oh, honey," Ruby said softly. "He recognizes you just fine. He's just scared because he knows what it cost you to become who you are. Parents never stop worrying, you know." The police cars pulled into the station's parking lot, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. Two officers stepped out, approaching cautiously. "Miss," one of them called, "we had reports of a disturbance." "Officer Thompson," Ruby interrupted, stepping forward. "You remember Sarah Mitchell, don't you? John Mitchell's daughter?" The older officer's eyes widened with recognition. "Little Sarah? Well, not so little anymore, I guess. Want to tell me what happened here?" Sarah straightened her uniform slightly. "Just had to explain some manners to Marcus Graves and his crew. Nothing serious." Officer Thompson's eyebrows shot up. "Marcus Graves? And you're still standing?" He let out a low whistle. "Times sure have changed." "No, sir," Sarah replied quietly. "People have changed. Sometimes that's what it takes to make things better." As the officers began taking statements from witnesses, Sarah glanced at the clock. Her bus would be arriving soon, carrying her away from Pine Valley once again. But this time, she'd left more than just memories behind. She'd left a lesson about strength, about standing up for what's right, and about the true meaning of coming home. As Officer Thompson finished taking statements, Sarah noticed Jason Reed lurking at the edge of the bus station's parking lot. The teenager's earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a mix of shame and lingering anger as he watched the scene unfold. His wrist, the one Sarah had twisted at Ruby's diner, was now wrapped in an ace bandage. More for show than necessity, she suspected. "You want me to run him off?" Officer Thompson asked, following Sarah's gaze. Sarah shook her head. I think he needs to see this." She adjusted her pack and walked toward Jason, her boots crunching against the gravel. The boy tensed as she approached, but didn't retreat. "Come to gloat?" he spat, though his voice trembled slightly. "No," Sarah replied evenly. "Come to talk if you're willing to listen." Jason glanced around nervously, clearly expecting his brother Marcus to reappear at any moment. "Why should I listen to you?" "Because right now you're standing at a crossroads, Jason, and what you choose to do next will define more than just today." Sarah leaned against a nearby lamppost, deliberately casual. "Your brother made his choice years ago. Doesn't mean you have to follow the same path." The teenager's facade cracked slightly. "You don't know anything about me or my brother." "I know enough," Sarah said softly. "I know what it's like to feel like you have something to prove, to feel like the world doesn't take you seriously." She paused, letting her words sink in. But there's a difference between earning respect and demanding it. Jason's shoulders slumped slightly. Marcus. He wasn't always like this, you know. He used to be different. Used to look out for me, teach me stuff, then Dad left and... He trailed off, kicking at the gravel. And he got hard, Sarah finished. Started thinking the only way to be strong was to make others feel weak. Yeah, Jason whispered. Something like that. Sarah studied him for a moment. You remind me of someone I knew in basic training, Tommy Martinez. Came in with a chip on his shoulder the size of Texas. Thought he had to fight everyone and everything to prove himself. What happened to him? Jason asked, despite himself. He learned that real strength isn't about how many people you can knock down. It's about who you choose to help up. Sarah straightened up. Last I heard, he was running a youth center in his hometown, teaching kids martial arts and computer skills, making a difference. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, a bus engine rumbled, approaching the station. I messed up, Jason admitted finally, his voice barely audible. At the diner, with Marcus. All of it. Yes, you did, Sarah agreed. But messing up isn't the end of the story. It's what you do next that matters. Jason looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time. He's going to be mad, Marcus, I mean, when he finds out I'm talking to you. Probably, Sarah nodded. But you're old enough to make your own choices now. The question is, what kind of person do you want to be? The bus pulled into the station, its brakes hissing as it came to a stop. Passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to board. I don't know, Jason said honestly. I don't know anymore. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a business card. This is the number for the Veterans Outreach Center in town. Ask for Sergeant Maria Rodriguez. Tell her Sarah Mitchell sent you. She runs a mentorship program for young people. Could be a good place to start figuring things out. Jason took the card hesitantly, staring at it as if it might bite him. Why are you helping me? After everything. Because someone once helped me when I was standing at my own crossroads, Sarah replied. Sometimes that's all it takes. One person believing you can be better than what you've shown. The bus driver called out the final boarding call. Sarah shouldered her pack, preparing to leave. Miss Mitchell? Jason called after her. I'm sorry about the diner, about calling Marcus, all of it. Sarah turned back, offering him a small smile. Prove it. Not to me. To yourself. Show the world who Jason Reed really is, not who everyone expects him to be. As she climbed the bus steps, Sarah heard Jason's voice one last time. Will I see you again? Pine Valley's my home, she replied. I'll be around. Make me proud, kid. The bus doors closed with a hydraulic whoosh, and Sarah found her seat watching through the window as Jason stood in the gathering dusk, the business card still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. Ruby Walker appeared beside him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Sarah couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Jason nod, saw him wipe quickly at his eyes with his sleeve. As the bus pulled away from the station, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She had come to Pine Valley expecting to pass through, but instead found herself planting seeds of change. Sometimes, she realized, the biggest battles weren't won with fists or force, but with understanding and a chance at redemption. The lights of Pine Valley began to fade behind them, but Sarah knew this wasn't an ending. For Jason, for Marcus, for the town itself, it was just the beginning of a different kind of story. 2 weeks later, Marcus Graves sat in his darkened living room, nursing both his wounded pride and his fourth beer of the evening. The TV flickered silently in the corner, casting shifting shadows across the walls. He hadn't shown his face much around Pine Valley since the incident at the bus station. His reputation had taken a hit that no amount of intimidation could easily repair. The sound of a motorcycle approaching drew his attention. Through the window, he recognized the familiar outline of Carter Hayes, his second in command. The bike's engine cut off, followed by heavy boots on the porch steps. "It's open," Marcus called out before Carter could knock. Carter entered, his leather vest bearing fresh road dust. His expression was grim as he settled into the worn armchair across from Marcus. We got trouble, boss. Marcus took another long pull from his beer. What kind? Jason, Carter said carefully. He's been seen at the Veterans Center downtown, running with a different crowd. The beer can crumpled in Marcus's grip. What? Gets worse, Carter continued. He's been talking to some of the younger kids in the neighborhood, telling them about some mentorship program, even got Tommy and Mike interested. Marcus hurled the empty can across the room. That soldier bitch, he snarled. She's poisoning my own brother against me. The word around town is changing too, Carter added reluctantly. People aren't as scared of us anymore, that fight at the bus station. Everyone saw what happened. Marcus stood abruptly, swaying slightly from the alcohol. Then we'll remind them why they should be scared. Where's this Veterans Center? Carter shifted uncomfortably. Marcus, maybe we should think this through. After what happened with that Mitchell woman. She got lucky, Marcus snapped. Caught us off guard. This time we'll be ready. He grabbed his keys from the coffee table. Get the boys together. Tonight we send a message. Meanwhile, at the Veterans Outreach Center, Sarah Mitchell sat across from Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, sharing a cup of coffee and discussing Jason's progress. He's got potential, Maria said, her dark eyes thoughtful. Once you get past that tough guy act, there's a smart kid in there. Good with computers, too. Been helping us set up a coding class for the younger kids. Sarah smiled, remembering her conversation with Jason at the bus station. Sometimes people just need a chance to be more than what others expect of them. Maria nodded, then hesitated. But there's something else you should know. We've been hearing rumors. Marcus and his crew aren't taking kindly to losing their influence. Some people think they might try something. Let them try, Sarah replied calmly, though her posture straightened slightly. This center is doing good work. I won't let them threaten that. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of multiple motorcycles approaching. Sarah and Maria exchanged knowing looks. Get everyone to the back rooms, Sarah said, rising from her chair. Call Officer Thompson. I'll handle this. Maria grabbed Sarah's arm. You don't have to face them alone. Some of our vets are still here. They'd stand with you. Sarah shook her head. Number. This started between me and Marcus. I'll finish it. As Maria hurried to secure the building, Sarah walked calmly to the front door. Through the glass, she could see Marcus and his gang parking their bikes, at least a dozen of them this time. They carried bats, chains, and worse. Sarah stepped outside, letting the door close behind her. The evening air was thick with tension as she descended the center's front steps. Marcus stepped forward, a metal pipe resting casually against his shoulder. You just can't help yourself, can you? He growled. Had to turn my own brother against me. Jason made his own choice, Sarah replied evenly. Maybe it's time you made a better one too. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, I'm about to make a choice, all right. Boys, tear this place apart. Show everyone what happens when you cross the iron wolves. The gang members spread out, moving toward the building, but before they could take more than a few steps, a familiar voice rang out. Stop! Jason Reed emerged from the shadows of the building, followed by several other teenagers, including some who had been with him at the diner that first day. This isn't right, Marcus, Jason said, his voice shaking but determined. These people are trying to help. They helped me. Marcus's face contorted with rage. Get out of the way, little brother. This doesn't concern you anymore. Yes, it does, Jason insisted. Everything you taught me about being strong, about family, this isn't it. This is just being a bully because you're scared of change. The gang members exchanged uncertain glances. Some of them had known Jason since he was a kid, had watched him grow up under Marcus's shadow. Last warning, Marcus snarled, but his voice held a note of desperation now. Move, or you're going to get hurt. Sarah stepped forward, positioning herself between Marcus and his brother. No one's getting hurt tonight, she said firmly. This ends now, Marcus. One way or another. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the tension. Red and blue lights began reflecting off the buildings as police cars turned onto the street. Marcus's grip on the pipe tightened. For a moment, Sarah thought he might swing anyway. Consequences be damned. But then his shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. This isn't over, he muttered. But the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied quietly. "The question is, what comes next?" As the police cars pulled up and Officer Thompson emerged, Marcus Graves faced a choice that would define more than just this moment. And in his brother's steady gaze he saw a reflection of the person he used to be, before anger and fear had twisted him into something else entirely. The night held its breath, waiting to see which path he would choose. Officer Thompson stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his holster. "Evening, Marcus," he said calmly. "Seems like we're having ourselves a situation here." Marcus Graves stood frozen, the metal pipe still gripped in his hand, caught between his old instincts and the reality of his position. His younger brother Jason remained firmly planted between him and the veteran center, shoulder to shoulder with Sarah Mitchell. "No situation," Marcus finally said, letting the pipe clatter to the ground. "We were just leaving." "That right?" Thompson asked, his eyes scanning the assembled bikers. "Because it looks to me like you boys came prepared for something more than a social call." Sarah watched the conflict play across Marcus's face, the struggle between pride and self-preservation, between the image he'd built and the brother he used to be. She recognized that look. She'd seen it in the eyes of too many soldiers who'd lost their way. "Marcus," she said softly, drawing his attention. "You don't have to keep walking this path. The center has programs for veterans too, people who understand what it's like to come home and feel lost." His head snapped up. "What did you say?" "3rd Marines, right?" Sarah gestured to a faded tattoo visible beneath his leather vest. "I saw the ink. When did you serve?" The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, and Jason's eyes widened. It was clear this wasn't common knowledge among them. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Fallujah, 2 tours. Not that it matters anymore." "It always matters," Sarah replied. "Just like it matters that you raised Jason when your father couldn't, that you protected him, taught him to be strong." "Until you turned him against me," Marcus spat, but the anger seemed forced now. "No," Jason interjected. "She showed me there's more than one kind of strength, the kind you taught me before everything changed." Sergeant Maria Rodriguez emerged from the center, her military bearing evident as she approached. "We have a veterans group that meets on Thursday nights," she said, addressing Marcus directly. "No pressure, no judgment. Just people who've walked similar paths." Marcus laughed bitterly. "You think sitting in a circle talking about feelings is going to fix anything?" "No," Maria replied bluntly. "But it's a hell of a lot better than watching your life spiral while pushing away the people who care about you." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. The other bikers were watching Marcus intently, waiting to see how their leader would respond. Sarah noticed that several of them had already backed away from the building, their weapons lowered. Officer Thompson cleared his throat. "Here's what's going to happen. You boys are going to get on your bikes and ride away nice and peaceful. We'll forget about any property damage intentions you might have had tonight. But this is your only free pass." Marcus turned to his gang, his expression unreadable. "Go home," he ordered. "All of you." "Boss?" Carter stepped forward uncertainly. "What about—" "I said go home." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Just go." One by one, the bikers mounted their motorcycles. The rumble of engines filled the night as they pulled away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the parking lot. Jason approached his brother cautiously. "Remember when Dad first left?" he asked. "You told me that real men face their problems head-on, that running away never solved anything." Marcus closed his eyes, the words hitting home. "I remember." "So stop running," Jason pleaded. "From whatever's been eating at you since you came back from overseas, from the person you used to be, from me." Sarah watched the exchange, recognizing the pivotal moment for what it was. Sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with fists or weapons, but with the courage to face oneself. "The first meeting's tomorrow at 7, Maria offered. "No uniform required. Just come as you are." Marcus looked at his brother, then at Sarah, then finally at Maria. "I can't promise anything," he said gruffly. "That's okay." Maria replied with a small smile. We're not asking for promises. Just a chance. Officer Thompson holstered his weapon. Need a ride home, Marcus? No. Marcus shook his head. I'll walk. Got some thinking to do anyway. As Marcus turned to leave, Sarah called out, Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit when you need help. He paused, but didn't turn around. Maybe, he said softly, then began walking into the darkness. Jason watched his brother's retreating figure. Will he come? He asked no one in particular. That's up to him, Sarah answered. But the fact that he's walking away instead of fighting, that's already a step in the right direction. The night settled around them as the last police car pulled away. Sarah looked at the Veterans Center, standing peaceful and undamaged, then at Jason, who seemed both older and younger in that moment. You did good tonight, she told him. I was scared, he admitted. Courage isn't about not being scared, Sarah replied. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. As they headed back inside, Sarah couldn't help but think about how many battles were won not through force, but through understanding. Sometimes the biggest victories came in the smallest moments of change, in a brother standing up for what's right, in a hardened man walking away from violence, in the simple act of reaching out to someone who was lost. Sarah spent the next 2 days methodically preparing for the coming storm. She'd served in enough conflict zones to know that the best defense started with good intelligence and careful planning. With Marcus's help, she mapped out every possible entry point to the Veterans Center and its surroundings. The capital city crew, she asked, marking locations on a detailed street map. How many can we expect? Marcus leaned over the table, his expression grim. At least 20, probably more. Their leader, Victor Romano, likes to make statements. He'll bring enough muscle to make sure everyone remembers it. Tell me about him, Sarah prompted, studying Marcus's reaction. Ex-military, like us. Dishonorable discharge. Did time for assault, got out and built himself a little empire. Marcus's jaw tightened. He's not just cruel. He's smart, tactical, and he holds grudges. Officer Thompson, sitting across from them, added his own intel. We've got reports of his crew moving into position already. Small groups trying to look casual. They're staying at the Mountain View Motel on the edge of town. Sarah nodded, adding another mark to the map. Any chance of getting backup from the state police? Not without more concrete evidence, Thompson sighed, and by then it might be too late. The door opened, and Maria Rodriguez entered, carrying a fresh pot of coffee. Just got off the phone with some contacts at Fort Benning, she reported. They're sympathetic but can't officially intervene in a civilian matter. Sarah had expected as much, but it still narrowed their options. She studied the map again, her mind working through scenarios. Marcus, how many of your former crew can we count on? 8, maybe 10. The ones who've been coming to meetings, working the program, they're solid. That still leaves us outnumbered, Thompson pointed out. Sarah stood up straight, her decision made. Numbers aren't everything. I've seen smaller forces hold ground against bigger ones. It's about position, preparation, and purpose. She began outlining her plan, drawing on years of military experience. We'll set up a perimeter here and here, she marked the spots. Thompson, can you keep patrol cars visible in these areas? Not to engage, but to discourage them from spreading out too much. Can do, Thompson agreed. I've got 4 officers I trust completely. Good. Marcus, we'll position your people here, here, and here. I want a clear message. They don't get near the center without going through all of us. Maria raised a concern. What about the regular members? The veterans who come for counseling, the kids in the programs? We shut down for 2 days, Sarah decided. Tell everyone it's for renovations or something. The fewer civilians around, the better. As they refined the details, Jason knocked and entered, carrying several bags. Got the supplies you asked for, he reported to Sarah. Motion sensors, cameras, the works. Sarah smiled approvingly. The boys' tech skills were proving invaluable. Good. Start setting them up with Maria. I want to know the second anyone suspicious comes within 2 blocks. The next few hours were a flurry of activity. Sarah supervised the placement of surveillance equipment, coordinated with Thompson on police positions, and worked with Marcus to organize his reformed crew members. By nightfall, they had transformed the center into a defensible position without making it obvious to casual observers. Sarah stood on the roof, watching the sunset over Pine Valley. The town looked peaceful, unaware of the confrontation brewing in its midst. Marcus joined her, lighting a cigarette. "Never thought I'd be on this side of things," he mused. "Having second thoughts?" Sarah asked, studying his profile. He shook his head. "Number just thinking about how things change. A month ago, I would have been the one planning to tear this place down. Now," he gestured at the center below, "now I'm ready to fight to protect it." "That's called growth," Sarah said simply. "Jason looks up to you, you know," Marcus said after a pause. "Hell, a lot of people do. You've changed things here." "We've all changed things," Sarah corrected him. "Every person who chose a better path, every kid who found a new direction, every veteran who took that first step toward healing. That's what's changing Pine Valley." Their conversation was interrupted by Jason's voice crackling over the radio. "Movement at the motel. 3 bikes just left, heading this way." Sarah's posture shifted instantly from reflective to alert. Probably just reconnaissance, but let's not take chances. Everyone to their positions. As they headed downstairs, Marcus spoke again. "Sarah, thanks for believing in second chances." She paused at the door. "Thank me by proving I was right. Now let's go show Victor Romano what happens when he threatens our family." The night settled over Pine Valley like a heavy blanket, but beneath its quiet surface 2 forces prepared to clash, one fighting to destroy, the other to protect. And at the center of it all stood Sarah Mitchell, a soldier who had come home to find a different kind of battle, but an equally important one to win. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight they would stand ready, united in a cause greater than themselves. The next morning dawned gray and tense. Sarah stood at the center's main window, watching early light creep over Pine Valley streets. She'd been up most of the night, monitoring security feeds and fine-tuning their preparations. Behind her, Marcus and his reformed crew members checked their positions one final time. "Movement on 4th Street, Jason's voice crackled over the radio. He was stationed in the makeshift command center they'd set up in the computer lab, monitoring the surveillance network he'd helped install. 5 bikes heading our way, more coming from Pine Street and Market. Sarah keyed her radio. "Thompson, you seeing this?" "Affirmative," the officer responded. "Got eyes on at least 15 bikes. They're moving in a standard pincer formation. These guys have military training." "Victor's at the front," Marcus added, peering through binoculars. "Just like him to lead the charge." Sarah studied the approaching riders through her own field glasses. Victor Romano cut an imposing figure on his custom chopper, tall, heavily muscled, with a shock of gray hair and a face marked by old scars. His crew moved with practiced precision, spreading out to cover all approaches to the center. "Remember," Sarah broadcast to their defenders, "we hold our positions. Let them make the first move. We're protecting this place, not starting a war." The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, echoing off buildings as Victor's crew surrounded the center. They killed their engines in unison, the sudden silence more threatening than the noise had been. Victor dismounted, removing his sunglasses to survey the building. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Marcus standing beside Sarah in the window. "Marcus Graves," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the parking lot. "So the rumors are true. The mighty Iron Wolves have turned into lapdogs." "Times change, Victor," Marcus responded calmly. "Maybe it's time you did too." Victor spat on the ground. "Change? I'll show you change. By the time we're done here, there won't be enough of this place left to change back." He gestured to his crew, who began advancing toward the center, carrying chains, pipes, and worse. Sarah noted their movements, disciplined, coordinated. These weren't ordinary thugs. "Last chance to walk away," Sarah called out. "Nobody has to get hurt today." Victor's laugh was cold and sharp. "Look at this, boys. Little lady soldier thinks she can tell us what to do." His expression hardened. You embarrassed the iron wolves, made them soft. Time to remind everyone what happens when you cross the wrong people. He raised his arm, about to signal his men forward, when police sirens wailed. 3 patrol cars pulled into view, blocking the street exits. Officer Thompson's voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "This is the Pine Valley Police. Disperse immediately." Victor barely glanced at the police cars. "That the best you got? A few small-town cops?" "Not quite," Sarah replied. On her signal, Marcus's reformed crew members emerged from their hidden positions, along with several veterans from the center, all of them standing ready, facing Victor's men with quiet determination. "Still like your odds?" Sarah asked. Victor's face contorted with rage. "You think this changes anything? We've got the numbers, the experience." "The experience?" Sarah cut him off, stepping outside to face him directly. "Let's talk about experience." She moved with measured confidence, her bearing unmistakably military. 3rd Group, Special Forces. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Trained in close-quarters combat and urban warfare. She stopped a few feet from him. "That enough experience for you?" Victor's men shifted uneasily, but their leader stood his ground. "You think your fancy training scares me? I've got my own experience." He drew himself up. "Force recon. I've forgotten more about combat than you'll ever know." "Then you should remember the first rule they taught us," Sarah replied evenly. "Choose your battles wisely. This isn't one you want." "This is exactly what I want," Victor snarled. "Teaching upstarts like you and these traitors their place." He turned to his crew. "Take them down. All of them." But as his men moved forward, something unexpected happened. From the rooftops of neighboring buildings, more figures appeared. Veterans from surrounding towns alerted by Maria's network. They stood silent and watchful, a clear message in their presence. Victor's advance faltered as he realized the true scope of what he faced. This wasn't just about overwhelming a small group of defenders. This was about confronting an entire community that had chosen to stand together. Sarah's voice cut through the tension. "Your move, Victor. But remember, whatever happens next, you started it. And we'll finish it." The morning air crackled with potential violence as both sides stood ready, waiting to see who would make the first move in a confrontation that would determine more than just the fate of one veteran center in a small Georgia town. Time seemed to freeze in the early morning light as Victor and his crew faced off against Sarah's defenders. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, both sides waiting for the inevitable spark that would ignite the powder keg. That spark came from an unexpected source. A lone figure emerged from the veterans' center, Jason Reed, walking calmly toward the space between the 2 groups. "Jason, get back inside," Marcus shouted, but his younger brother kept walking. Victor sneered. "Well, if it isn't the baby wolf, come to watch your brother's precious center burn?" Jason stopped in the middle ground, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot. "You know what I see, Victor? I see a man so scared of change that he'd rather destroy something good than admit the world's moving on without him." "Brave words from a kid," Victor growled. "Let's see how brave you are when—" "When what?" Jason interrupted. "When you prove how tough you are by beating up teenagers? By destroying a place that helps veterans heal? Real impressive." Victor's face reddened. "You got a death wish, boy?" "No," Jason replied steadily. "I've just learned what real strength looks like, and it's not you." He turned to address Victor's crew. "Look around you. Look at what you're about to do. There are kids inside who come here every day to learn. Veterans who finally found a place where they belong. People putting their lives back together." He gestured to the center behind him. "Is this really what you signed up for? Destroying hope?" Sarah watched as uncertainty flickered across several faces in Victor's crew. Jason's words were hitting home, especially with the younger members. "Enough of this!" Victor roared, starting forward, but 3 of his men suddenly stepped back, lowering their weapons. "He's right, boss," one of them said. "This ain't right." Victor spun around. "Cowards! All of you!" But his words had lost their power. More of his crew were backing away, looking uncomfortably at the center, at the veterans on the rooftops. at the community they'd been prepared to terrorize. Sarah moved forward to stand beside Jason. "It's over, Victor. Your crew knows it, even if you don't." "Nothing's over," Victor snarled, pulling a knife from his jacket. "I'll burn this place down myself if I have to." He lunged forward, blade flashing in the morning light, but Sarah was ready. She sidestepped his attack with practiced ease, catching his wrist and using his own momentum to send him sprawling. Victor recovered quickly, slashing wildly. "You think you're better than me?" he screamed. "I was a Marine. I was somebody." "You still can be," Sarah replied, dodging another attack. "But this isn't the way." The fight was brief but intense. Victor's military training showed in his movements, but rage and hatred had made him sloppy. Sarah defended efficiently, letting him wear himself out while keeping him away from Jason and the center. Finally, with a precise strike, she disarmed him. Victor stumbled back, chest heaving, his facade of control completely shattered. "Do it," he challenged. "Finish it." Instead, Sarah lowered her guard. "Number. That's not what we do here." Officer Thompson approached with handcuffs ready. "Victor Romano, you're under arrest for attempted assault, criminal conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges we'll sort out down at the station." As Thompson led Victor away, his former crew dispersed quietly, leaving their leader to face the consequences of his choices alone. The veterans on the rooftops began climbing down, and Marcus's reformed iron wolves gathered around Jason, clapping him on the back. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen," Marcus told his brother, pulling him into a rough hug. "Learned from the best," Jason replied with a small smile. "Both the brave and the stupid parts." Sarah watched the brothers, feeling a deep satisfaction. This was what victory really looked like. Not defeated enemies, but transformed lives. Maria approached, surveying the scene. "Quite a morning," she observed. "Think they'll be back?" "No," Sarah said confidently. Victor's crew saw something today they couldn't unsee. The difference between destruction and protection, between fear and respect. The sun was fully up now, painting the Veterans Center in warm morning light. Inside, they could hear the first regular members arriving, unaware of how close they'd come to losing this sanctuary. "We should get this place cleaned up," Sarah said, noting the scattered weapons and debris from the confrontation. "We've got classes starting in an hour." As they began setting things right, Ruby Walker arrived with boxes of coffee and pastries. "Thought you all might need breakfast," she announced. "Word travels fast in Pine Valley." The next hour was filled with quiet activity as the community came together. Police officers helped stack chairs, veterans swept the parking lot, and former Iron Wolves worked alongside center members to restore order. Sarah found herself standing with Marcus and Jason, watching the sunrise fully illuminate their defended home. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "for the first time since coming back from deployment, I feel like I'm serving something worthwhile again." "That's because you are," Sarah replied. "Sometimes the most important battles are fought right here at home." Jason looked up at his brother. "Does this mean the Iron Wolves are really done?" Marcus considered this. "The old Iron Wolves, yeah. But maybe there's room for something new, something that protects instead of threatens. The Iron Guardians," Jason suggested with a grin. Marcus laughed, ruffling his brother's hair. "We'll work on the name." Sarah smiled, watching Pine Valley come alive around them. This was why she'd stayed, not just to fight one battle, but to help build something lasting, something that would continue to change lives long after she moved on. "Coffee?" Ruby offered, appearing beside them with steaming cups. "Thanks," Sarah accepted gratefully. "Hey, Ruby, remember my first day back? At the diner?" "Like it was yesterday," Ruby chuckled. "Seems like a lifetime ago now." "It was," Sarah agreed, sipping her coffee. "For all of us." 1 month later, Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium in the Veterans Center's newly renovated main hall. The room was packed with familiar faces. Veterans, teenagers, community members, and yes, even some former Iron Wolves, now sporting new patches that read, "Pine Valley Veterans Guardians." "When I first came back to Pine Valley," she began, her voice carrying easily through the space. "I thought I was just passing through. Funny how life has other plans sometimes." The crowd chuckled softly. In the front row, Ruby Walker dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Beside her sat Officer Thompson, out of uniform but still carrying himself with professional dignity. Marcus and Jason Reed sat near the back, the older brother's arm draped protectively over the younger's shoulders. "This center has always been more than just a building," Sarah continued. "It's a symbol of what's possible when people choose to stand together, when they choose hope over fear, growth over stagnation, and community over division." She gestured to Maria Rodriguez, who sat on the stage behind her. "Under Sergeant Rodriguez's leadership, this place has transformed countless lives, and now with the support of our community and the dedication of our new volunteers, we are ready to expand that mission." Maria stepped forward, unfolding architectural plans. "Thanks to donations and grants, we're adding a new wing to the center, computer labs for job training, expanded counseling spaces, and a dedicated area for our youth mentorship programs." The audience applauded, and Sarah couldn't help but smile as she saw Jason beam with pride. The tech programs he'd helped develop had become one of the center's most popular offerings. "But the biggest change," Sarah continued when the applause died down, "isn't in the building. It's in the hearts and minds of this community. 1 month ago, we stood together against those who would destroy what we've built. Today, we're standing together to build something even stronger." She paused, making eye contact with various members of the audience. "I see former adversaries working side by side. I see veterans finding purpose in helping others navigate the challenges they've overcome. I see young people discovering their potential through guidance and support, rather than intimidation and fear." Marcus shifted in his seat, but held his head high. The Iron Wolves' transformation into the Veterans Guardians had become a symbol of Pine Valley's larger change. They now provided security for community events, mentored at-risk youth, and helped maintain the center's facilities. "Which is why," Sarah said, her voice taking on a more personal tone, "this next announcement is particularly difficult for me to make. I've been offered a position coordinating veteran outreach programs at the state level. It's an opportunity to take what we've built here in Pine Valley and help other communities create similar programs." A murmur ran through the crowd. Ruby's hand flew to her mouth, and Jason sat up straighter, his expression concerned. "I've accepted the position," Sarah continued, "but Pine Valley will always be home. The programs we've established here will continue under Maria's excellent leadership, and I'll be back regularly to check on everyone's progress." She smiled warmly at the assembled faces. "Besides, I have a feeling the Veterans Guardians wouldn't let me stay away for too long." This earned a laugh, particularly from Marcus's group. Over the past month, they'd become fiercely protective of both the center and its people. "Change is never easy," Sarah said, her voice softening. "We've all learned that. But sometimes the hardest changes lead us exactly where we need to be. I came back to Pine Valley looking for something familiar, only to find that what I really needed was to be part of something new." Ruby was openly crying now, and even Officer Thompson looked suspiciously misty-eyed. Maria stepped forward to stand beside Sarah at the podium. "The center will be in good hands," Sarah assured everyone, "and so will Pine Valley, because what we've built here isn't dependent on any one person. It's built on the strength of every person in this room, and every person who will walk through those doors looking for help, hope, or healing." She took a deep breath, fighting back her own emotions. "So this isn't goodbye. It's just the beginning of a new chapter. Because that's what we do here. We keep growing, keep changing, keep helping others find their way home." The applause that followed was thunderous, filling the hall with waves of appreciation and support. As Sarah stepped back from the podium, she caught Jason's eye. The teenager gave her a thumbs up, his gesture carrying all the confidence and maturity he'd gained over the past months. This, Sarah realized, was what victory really looked like. Not in dramatic confrontations or displays of force, but in the quiet transformations that happened one person, one day at a time. Pine Valley had changed her just as much as she had changed it, and sometimes that was exactly how it was supposed to be. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over Pine Valley, much like it had on the day Sarah Mitchell first returned home. But this time, as she stood outside Ruby's diner with her military pack at her feet, everything felt different. A small crowd had gathered to see her off. Not the whole town, but the people who had become her second family over these transformative months. Ruby Walker emerged from the diner carrying a large paper bag. "Chicken fried steak," she explained, pressing the bag into Sarah's hands. "For the road. Can't have you eating truck stop food on your first day at the new job." Sarah accepted the bag with a grateful smile. "Thanks, Ruby. For everything." "Just promise you'll visit," Ruby replied, pulling her into a tight hug. "And not just for the food." Officer Thompson stepped forward next, extending his hand formally before breaking into a grin and hugging her as well. "State program's lucky to have you," he said. "Though I have to admit it's been nice having someone around who can handle the tough cases." "You've got plenty of help now," Sarah reminded him, nodding toward Marcus and his veterans' guardians, who stood respectfully to the side. Marcus approached, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his new leather vest, the guardian patch still pristine and bright. "The center's security detail is all set up," he reported. "Maria's got our schedule for the next month, and we've got teams organized for the youth mentoring program." "And the computer labs?" Sarah asked, turning to Jason. The teenager grinned. "Running smooth as silk. Got 3 new coding classes starting next week, and the job training program's already placed 5 vets in tech positions." Sarah felt a surge of pride. In just a few months, these people had transformed not just their own lives, but the entire community. The Veterans Center had become a beacon of hope, drawing people from neighboring towns who wanted to replicate its success. Maria Rodriguez stepped forward, her military bearing softened by genuine emotion. "Your office will be waiting when you visit," she said, "and so will we." "I'll hold you to that," Sarah replied, embracing her friend and colleague. As the group gathered closer, Sarah found herself thinking about that first confrontation at the diner, the fight at the bus station, the final showdown at the center. Each moment had seemed like an ending at the time, but had really been a beginning. "Before I go," she said, addressing the group, "I want you all to know something. What we built here, it's not just about second chances or redemption. It's about recognizing that strength comes in many forms, and the strongest communities are the ones that lift each other up instead of tearing each other down." She looked at Marcus and Jason, standing tall and proud in their new roles. At Ruby, who had never lost faith in the power of kindness. At Thompson, who had learned to see beyond badges and stereotypes. At Maria, who would carry their mission forward. "Pine Valley taught me that coming home isn't about finding everything exactly as you left it," Sarah continued. "It's about finding new ways to belong, new purposes to serve, new battles worth fighting." The sound of an approaching bus rumbled in the distance. Sarah shouldered her pack, taking one last look at the familiar faces before her. "Keep making me proud," she said softly. "All of you." The goodbyes were quick. Military efficiency mingled with small-town warmth. As Sarah boarded the bus, she caught a final glimpse of Pine Valley through the window. The late sun gilded the buildings in gold, making everything look both familiar and new. The bus pulled away and Sarah settled into her seat, Ruby's dinner still warm in her lap. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jason. "Don't worry, Sarge. We've got this." She smiled, typing back. Never doubted it for a second. As Pine Valley receded in the distance, Sarah Mitchell reflected on how a simple stop in her hometown had turned into something so much more. She had arrived as a soldier looking for a familiar port in the storm of life. She was leaving as something else, a bridge between what was and what could be, a catalyst for change, a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen not on battlefields, but in the quiet moments when people choose to be better than they were yesterday. The bus rolled on toward her new adventure, but Sarah knew that Pine Valley would always be there, growing, changing, and welcoming home those who needed it most. After all, that's what families do, the ones we're born into and the ones we build along the way. And sometimes, she realized, the longest journey brings us exactly where we need to be. The end. Thank you for listening.